Okay, folks, it's 10 past 5. I'd like to get started, or we'd like to get started. As people come, I will continue to admit people in. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Kerrigan, Chief of Police for Nashua Police Department. I'm here with several of my officers, which we'll introduce a little later. For everybody joining, if you could please mute your mics as we go. If you have a question, you can send it in the group chat. Those will be monitored, and we're going to try to get to them and group them together and answer them. If you want to use the raise your hand feature, we will try to see that your hands are raised and also call. So the format for tonight is going to be, just so everybody knows, the meeting is being recorded, and it's going to be available on Nashua's community television at a later time. They have a conflicting event tonight, but they're going to record it and rebroadcast it. So tonight we're going to get started with some of the ground rules I just gave over. Linda's going to speak, Jordan's going to speak a bit, and then we really want to open it up to questions and concerns and comments from everybody here. Part of the philosophy of the community conversation, we as a police department and we as a group, the National Community Conversation for Race and Justice, want to hear what's on your mind, what your questions and concerns are. There's obviously a lot going on in the country right now. There's a lot going on that translates here. So it's important for us to listen to your questions and talk about them. So with that being said, I'm going to get started with having the chairperson for NCCRJ, Linda Gathright, speak. Linda?
Oh, chairperson. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see such beautiful faces out here and a lot of names that I do recognize. For those that don't know, we started back in 2014, as we call it, driving while Black, harassment, unfair treatment, those types of situations. And that's the person's perspective. And this is how we got started. So Southern New Hampshire Outreach for Black Unity invited the police department to that year. And Chief LeBoy took us up on it, and I think it was 2 officers the first year. I think it was you and Mike. I think it was, yeah. And so out of that, you know, we started talking about some of the things that were happening in the city and the type of complaints we were getting. Conversation going on, and one of those people was Suzanne Harvey, that is on the call with us today. And instead of trying to go separate ways, we decided to come together, work together to try to have a conversation with the police department. And in meeting with them and several other community workers, I want to say it was NAACP, it was representation from the Cultural Connection, there was representation, I forget the name of the group that she works for. It was Nashua PD, it was and a lot of other community organizations, other people that worked for other organizations within the city of Nashua. And we came and we started talking about it at the beginning. The chair people or co-chairs was Carlos Camacho and Sharon Roulette. And most of our meetings were held over at Riviera College. And that was the address for sending any type of correspondence at the time. But things moved on, people changed, their work habits changed and everything else. And the group that started off with probably about 10 people, maybe 15 at the time, literally grew into a conversation. Our first conversation was held in 2015, where over 200 people attended at Riviera College. And it was really set up that at each table, a scribe, a facilitator, and a police officer, because we wanted it to be intimate, very intimate, so that people could speak and be freely speak, not being afraid of recourse or anything of that nature. But it ended up really, really being a wonderful affair. A lot of feedback from the city of Nashua for the over 200 people that attended, and even the police officers, because it gave us a connection, a close connection, I should say, that we were in front of each other. We could speak and say the things that we felt, and we could listen to the police also explain to us what was going on or what their thoughts were in different situations. but we grew a little bit more, and I think we had one more of the larger ones, but we've had two smaller ones through the years with different things happening across the United States. They were more inviting people to that session, and we had quite a few young people that came out and told their stories in a session of maybe 50 people. So we still felt that we weren't reaching a group of kids that we knew we needed to reach, so we went into the high school. So we've had 2 at South and 2 at North, and which proved to be really good because we started off with attendees of 30. And I think by the time the last time we did this, I think it was around 40 kids. And the children chose to come to that. It's not something where we picked them to come. Nope, they signed up. They wanted to know more about the police department, and the police department wanted to know more about our young children. So I say all that to say that it's been 5 years of working hard in the city of Nashua with the police department, with mental health around everything, racial issues. What else? It was mental health and substance abuse, the whole 9 gamuts. They're very much a part, and most of these are very much a part of as well. So we hope that at the end of all this, that you guys will come and join us. There's a lot of work to be done, and that people will really be interested in coming to make Nashua a better place to live for all of us. And we do have problems here, without a doubt, always have, I must say, but we can at least talk about those problems now, and we can, that person that feels insecure or feel like they've been offended or whatever, can come and talk about it. So it's an open mic into the police department, which I think is really great with National Community Conversation on Race and Justice. So with that said, I think the next person to say something would be Chief or Jordan.
No, thank you, Linda. I appreciate that. I'll talk a little bit. We're going to have Jordan speak next. For those of you who don't know Jordan Thompson, I'll let him introduce himself a little. But him and I have been working together with NCCRJ for a number of years, and he is currently the head of Black Lives Matter New Hampshire, and he is working for the ACLU up in New Hampshire. I hope that's all right, Jordan. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Awesome. Yeah, I am the racial justice organizer for the ACLU of New Hampshire, and I'm also the founder and director of Black Lives Matter Nashua. So just to give you a little bit of context around Black Lives Matter Nashua, we are still relatively new. We were created sort of after the protests in Manchester. I had, in my ACLU capacity, worked with Black Lives Matter Manchester, which is a chapter that had been around for a number of years and had really been spearheaded by a small group of college-age students that I was very inspired by and continue to be inspired by today. So we decided to found Black Lives Matter Nashua to meet that need in our community, to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter Global Network, and to create a space for particularly young people, particularly Black young people in the city of Nashua, to speak up about these issues, to talk about the generational divide and differences of approach that we've had in addressing some of these issues, and to really have a safe space. So we have a team of about 3 or 4 individuals now. I'm the director. We have Samantha Searles, who's our communications director. We have Kurt Bertrand, who's our membership coordinator, and Jaden Smith, who is our youth outreach coordinator. And our first task as an organization was organizing the vigil on June 6th in Greeley Park in Nashua. And we were all so incredibly inspired and moved and grateful for the showing of support at that vigil, to be able to coordinate with members of the community and organizations like NAACP and Southern New Hampshire Outreach for Black Unity, and to have incredible speakers like Alderwoman Shoshana Kelly and Linda Harriet Gathright and Gloria Timmons, my grandmother. So many incredible speakers, a wonderful audience. We were just incredibly grateful for that really strong showing of support. So beyond that, we decided that we didn't just want this to be one singular moment We're trying to build a movement. We're trying to build a movement for lasting and sustainable change. And so we've been organizing these organizing sessions, and collectively we've had two, and we've had around 170 plus people collectively at these organizing sessions. So we continue to be really inspired by this strong showing of support. We are in the process of becoming a nonprofit to join the Black Lives Matter Global Network, which is a very sort of inaccessible task for a couple of 20-year-olds, but we're somehow making it work. And so we're very grateful for that opportunity as well. But to tell you a little bit more about my involvement with the Nashua community conversation on race and justice, I've been working with this group for the last 4 or 5 years now. And I first came to it in the summer of, must have been either 2015 or 2016. And tensions were really high. It was right after the shooting death of, there have been so many, I honestly am not sure which one it was after, very specifically. It could have been Philando Castile, but I could be wrong. So it was a very tense, I would say, environment initially. We were seeing this almost daily occurrence of another hashtag, another Black or brown person that had been gunned down or been a victim of state-sanctioned violence or police brutality. And we wanted to make a difference in our community while also acknowledging that many of these tensions we were experiencing were coming from what we were seeing on social media, what we were seeing on a national level, and that there needed to be change on both a national and local level. So coming to this conversation, I had those intentions. I did not see eye to eye with the now Chief Michael Carignan, but I'm very proud of the relationship that we've built and the conversations, the difficult conversations that we've had over the past 4 to 5 years. And I'm very proud, as Representative Linda Harriet Gathright had spoken about earlier, the forums that we've gone into Nashua High School North and Nashua High School South and had these conversations about relationships between members of law enforcement and the residents. And for many of these youth, they have not had these discussions before. They have not had these difficult conversations about police conduct. And it was really an eye-opening experience for me to be able to attend all of them. I believe it was an eye-opening experience for many of the officers that attended as well. And it's just a really great showing that our community can come together despite all of our differences to find some common ground on these issues. So to speak to very specific community demands, we, as Black Lives Matter Nashua, are planning to roll out a list of demands for the gubernatorial primary on Saturday. We are nonpartisan. We are not endorsing any candidate, but it's very important in this moment that we hold folks accountable. We've seen a lot of feedback over the past couple of days about issues related to racial justice in this gubernatorial primary. And so this is a main focus for us. But we need local reform. We need state reform. We need reform on a federal level. A lot of the demands that Black Lives Matter National and here at home we are, asking for are in coordination. We are asking for the prohibition of the transfer of federal surplus military equipment to local police department. We are having conversations about prohibiting the use of tear gas and rubber bullets on unarmed protesters. Statewide, we're having the conversation about making the existing Lori list public and ending official immunity, and having really difficult conversations that, of course, we may not all agree on about the divestment of funds from law enforcement agencies and reinvestment into education, healthcare, public housing, and more. So I do not say any of this to push these ideals onto everyone on the call, but to really give you an idea of, though we may have differences in policy, though we may have differences in viewpoint and perspective, we're able to come together and at least have the initial conversation about what our next steps are as a community, because members of law enforcement are members of our community, and we should be moving towards a situation where we all feel safe, where we are all completely comfortable going to members of law enforcement, and that we all feel protected in the same sense. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. If you would like more information about the work that we're doing at Black Lives Matter Nashua, you can follow us on the socials at BLM Nashua, and I'm also here. So feel free to reach out, and I will be at every single one of these upcoming conversations, and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Much appreciated as always. Folks, part of the process, first of all, I'd like to start off by saying I am super excited that I recognize so many faces. I had an intention of kind of thanking certain people that have been part of this for the last several years, but as I scroll through the pictures and the names, there's an enormous amount of you that have been involved in some way, shape, or form. So it'd be a disservice for me not to name everybody here. So for those of you who have been working with us for the last 5 years to try to improve relationships and improve understanding between each other, thank you very much. For everybody here who's new, welcome. What Jordan just said is 100% accurate. Our relationship certainly got off to, I wouldn't call it a rocky start, but it was a start of two people who were on opposite views and struggled to listen to the other perspective. So I think he and I personally have come a long way, and we understand and respect each other. One of the things from day one from this group that's been critically important to me is that myself and the police officers that work at the National Police Department listen to what the concerns from the community members are, whatever that community is, whether it be the Black community, the Latino community, the Brazilian community, the gay community, anything. It's important for us to listen and to try to understand the perspective of those respective groups. I also have been very, very vocal about the fact that it's important that if I'm going to listen and have a conversation, I expect the same in return. I expect everyone to listen to the police perspective, to listen to how we view these issues and what we think is important and why we do some of the things that we do. I think the National Police Department is one of the best in the country. We are accredited. We have high standards. We uphold those standards. We're willing to improve and we're willing to learn. And I think that's critical. I think people don't understand how difficult of a job policing is. It handles so many different aspects of life, mental health issues, substance misuse issues, crime issues, violence issues, victims of domestic and sexual abuse. We get tasked with doing a lot of things, and people don't understand the breadth of what we do. So part of these conversations for me is to introduce officers to you and vice versa and hear each other out. But it's important that if we're going to have an honest conversation, you be willing to listen and you be willing to engage each other, even though you may not agree. Some of the things that Jordan just spoke about and is trying to accomplish, I certainly don't support. I think that there are middle grounds, and I think that there are things that we should work together to do it a different way than what the proposals are. But that's part of the conversation, and that's something that we can sit back and say, no, I think you're wrong, and here's why. And we need to both listen to each other and support one another, and sometimes disagree. That's okay too. But I think it's important, above all else, for me to be willing to listen and learn, and be willing to explain our side of things. And I would ask the same for everybody here. So with all that being said, I'd like to open the floor up to anybody who would like a comment, who has a question. We have anybody on the board will answer questions. If it's law enforcement, myself or one of the 9 officers that are present on this meeting will answer. If it's government related, Linda can answer. School related, Gloria Timmons can answer. So we have a number of different resources here, and certainly if I don't know the answer or it's not appropriate for me to respond, somebody else can. With that being said, I'm going to start. I will open the floor. If anybody would like to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand feature, the reactions, or you can type it in the group chat section. And as they're waiting for some of those questions to come in, or if somebody has to just raise their hand and wave it, we're scrolling through all the pictures so we can identify who would like to say something or who would like to speak. I do know that there are a couple of questions that came in, and I'm just trying to find the questions right now. So a couple of questions came in. I'll get started with one, and if you have any more, please raise your hand. You would get sick of me talking all night, so I really, really need to hear from the people in the community and what they're doing. One of the questions that came in for us is, what kinds of de-escalation training are offered on a regular basis? It's a complicated question to answer, and I will try my best to explain it succinctly. De-escalation is not something that you teach. You don't just say, okay, this is how you de-escalate any situation. De-escalation involves, it involves training every one of our officers in the use of force, which includes escalation and de-escalation. It's important for us to have a use of force policy with standards and guidance as to how we do the things we do in a given situation that requires force. Obviously, we don't want to use force. We only use it when we have to use it. At no point in time is excessive force ever authorized. It is strictly forbidden in our SOPs and our policies and our trainings. The escalation and de-escalation training, we teach our officers when it's appropriate to, you start at command presence, verbal commands, and you work your way up through a continuum to possibly deadly force. Anything in between, you have to use the least amount of force to safely enable the arrest. And teaching our officers through scenario-based training, simulations training, where they're getting, basically paintballs shot at you in given situations, and video scenarios. All those types of trainings are part of that escalation and de-escalation when it's appropriate. You're giving officers the options in their toolbox to recognize if it's a cell phone or recognize different scenarios to be able to de-escalate. More important than that, part of de-escalation training is teaching our officers, giving our officers training, mental health training, giving them scenarios and to be aware of what different people suffering from mental health look like, how we can respond to do better with it. An example of it is an autistic person. We have a registration program where if somebody is autistic, they register with us. That person may have, say, for example, light sensitivities. We train our officers to recognize that. And if somebody registers and they put light sensitivities, when the police officers show up to the call, they know ahead of time of the sensitivities, and we don't use our flashlights as much. That prevents any trigger from the autistic person, which kind of makes that experience a little bit better and a lot safer. That's one example, but the same can be said for cultural competency training. We train all of our officers in cultural competency just to learn about different cultures, learn that everybody has different cultures, and it doesn't just have to be a black or a white. It can be anything, any one of the isms. It could be age, it could be, sex, it could be sexual preference. Any of those are part of the training that we give officers of different cultures and how to recognize them and respect them and be aware of them. That's also de-escalation training. If officers are more aware of different cultures and how to respond better to whether it be cultural or mental health issues or substance misuse issues, they're better able to de-escalate situations. We give every one of our police officers those tools and that training. We do a ridiculous amount of training. We believe in it. We think it's important to do for our officers. And all of those things are considered what I would consider part of de-escalation training. So it's not just when to shoot or when not to shoot somebody. It includes, all types of force. It includes educational training and race relations and cultural competency and all those things. So that's my answer to that question. And I'm starting to get some questions in. So Janelle Archer, forgive me if I say your names, mispronounce your names, asked how often these trainings are offered or required. So we have a minimum of, state law requires a minimum of 8 hours use of force a year, which includes reviewing of the use of force policy and the training, the simulations that I mentioned, the video training, the range training, and going over the policies and pepper spray. So those are minimum 8 hours a year. We give 16 hours a year in just that specialty. In addition to that, we'll give a 4 or 5 hour block of training in cultural competency. We had 16 hours of mental health first aid where we taught officers to recognize different mental health issues and how to respond to them. So it's not a clear-cut answer for how much how much we're offering these trainings, because they take a whole bunch of different views. Sometimes it's the use of force, sometimes it's cultural competency, that stuff. So minimum of 8 hours, but usually our officers will get anywhere from 32 to 40 hours in different types of training over the course of a year. Our trainings continued throughout the officer's career. Yes, like I said, every year every year officers have to go through the minimum of 8 hours. That's regardless of how much time on the job you have. I have to go through it every year. First year patrolman has to go throughout the year, and everybody in between. The cultural competency trainings, where we train not only the police officers, but we train all the civilian personnel in the police department, because they have just as much interaction with the public and the community. And I think it's important for them to be aware of all of those issues and differences and learn how to handle that better as well. Okay, so I see that was from a Desi. Forgive me here, folks. I'm going through the questions as they come in. People are okay. What? Well, I see a question from Alderwoman Lou. What are on the list of statewide objectives that Jordan referred to? Okay, I'm not quite sure. I may not have gotten the whole question from you, Alderwoman, so I will try to get back to that. Mr. Scalera wrote, defund the police is perhaps poorly marketed. Would it be possible for the police to even recommend that certain funds and resources be allocated to certain types of emergency calls? So that's a great question. I'm going to try to answer that quickly if I can. And I know Jordan and I may have some different views on that, but hearing a lot of talk lately about defunding the police department. When I said earlier, people don't really understand the depth of what the police officers do on a daily basis. We're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have training in mental health. We have training in substance misuse. We have training in, how to arrest people. We are basically social workers in addition to police officers. For somebody to defund the Nashua Police Department, let's say they defund $500,000 out of my budget to pay for social workers. You will not be able to pay with $500,000 enough social workers and enough substance misuse workers, all these different types of people, to do what the police department does 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a lot of specialized work, and it's not feasible to expect that so many different people can be hired with those funds to do the jobs that the police officers do. We're not experts in any of the fields, but we know and we're trained in enough of them to be able to manage those situations safely over time. Part of that is our partnerships with the different people in Nashua. I see many people here that I'm sure are very familiar with what we do in some of those partnerships. We work hand in hand with Bridges, domestic violence and sexual victims. We get them to a certain point. We work with them. We communicate what both of our objectives are, and we work together. If they need something, they call us, and vice versa. That relationship is also true with Marguerite's Place, Transitional Housing for Women. It's also true for the Child Advocacy Center and the Youth Council. All these different groups in Nashua, these nonprofits in Nashua that provide these services, we develop relationships with, and we work hand in hand with them. We bring some specialty to manage the situation and get them the handoff to those people. And the situation seems to be working in Nashua very well. The nonprofits work together. I know the YMCA is a tremendous resource for us to be able to get people different connections with services they need. And that's what is, I think, to me, what is important, what people don't realize about defunding the police. We do so much social work. We're not just out there arresting people and hurting people. We're out there doing so many social services that I don't think you could fund properly if you cut some of the money out of the police budget. Okay, I'm going to scroll up to a question here. A couple people have Ray. I'm looking for Ray's question. Forgive me, folks. Some people are throwing a lot of questions out. So Raymond asked, okay. Ray asked, are there some things that Jordan talked about, such as more investment in social services, that might be a plus for policing and result in less police calls from things such as domestic violence or substance abuse? Well, absolutely. I'm always going to be a supporter for some of those nonprofit groups that I just spoke about. Bridges is a tremendous organization. They have tremendous resources with experts. Increased funding to some of those is critical for them to be able to provide those services. And I would absolutely support more money going to those groups. I don't think that cutting the police department budget and giving them the money is necessarily the right thing to do. And I think if you asked some of the executive directors of those programs, they would agree with you because of the partnership. I will say that we do have a asset forfeiture program, and part of that is to give money back to some of those organizations, such as Bridges, Child Advocacy Center, and the Youth Council. Those are all groups that we give back to. And I see a comment about we might have training but can't go through schooling to be a social worker. If we applied, we would not be a social worker. I understand, and that is a legitimate comment. I wasn't trying to say that we are going to, we do the job that social workers can do. I'm not trying to disrespect any social workers. They do a tremendous job. But what I will say is that we do a degree of that social work to get them to the handoff to the services that they need. And we do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have an immediate response. And I think that's important because a lot of people in crisis, need services immediately, and social workers may not be available right at that time. And again, I'm not trying to say anything bad about any social workers, but that's the role the police have been tasked to do with people. So that's how we respond, and I think it's important. And I think the amount of training we give people to be able to handle those immediate situations and get them the handoff, I think is very important. Can you talk about the efforts that NPD makes to recruit a more diverse police department? Some of the difficulties that the department may face in recruiting minority candidates, in your opinion, on what the city could do to help with this effort. So one of the officers on this call is Officer Kevin Pasillo. He is one of our 2 recruiting officers, and I'm going to hand this question off to him. Kevin, Kevin, can you hear us?
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Dave, for the question. So myself and my partner, we go out to a lot of different organizations to speak to prospective applicants. We've been to the VA, we've been to the National Guard Center over in Londonderry. We've been to a bunch of different schools that have a high minority population to get people to sign up our test, and the efforts are working. Right now, we have 2 Hispanic officers coming on, hopefully beginning of new fiscal year. And this last test we just had, we had a pretty good percentage. I think it was around 12% were minority applicants. And we're still going through that process right now. I've reached out to the NAACP for assistance in helping us recruit minority applicants. So that's what we're doing on our end, and I think you will see the police department change a little bit in time, but we also only have so many positions available too, so it's kind of a balance, you know. But we're getting there.
Thanks, Kevin. And just to piggyback a little bit on what he's saying, I've made it one of my cornerstone goals to make a population of police officers that is reflective of Nashua's population. I would really love to have a proportion of officers that are Black, that are Latino, that are Indian, that are Brazilian. We have so many different groups in Nashua, I think, that are important, and I would love to have them with us. You know, when Kevin said we reached out to the NAACP, we work with the Martin Luther King breakfast. They're kind enough to allow us to put recruiting flyers into the folders to send out to everybody. We've spoken a little bit about resources maybe in out of state like Hartford and stuff like that to be able to recruit young Black officers. It's a struggle here. I'll be honest. I don't know. I'm not sure how else we can attract young Black officers here. We're trying, and I would welcome ideas. I would welcome suggestions. I would welcome anybody on this call to bring someone into us so we can give them a tour and talk to them and meet them and get, you know, to do better, because that's my goal. So we're working on it. It's a work in progress. I see a question about internal investigation process when a complaint or possible abuse of force is used. So we have policies that dictate what we do during internal complaints. So there are a couple different levels of complaint. First and foremost, anybody that has a complaint against any one of our officers at any time can come to the police department and file a complaint. If you're not comfortable coming to the police station, you can call up and ask for a supervisor, and they will entertain your complaint. Complaints can scale a range on a scale from rudeness, somebody doesn't like the way a particular call was handled, all the way up to excessive force or any type of bias-based issues. We investigate every single report that comes to us. Every time there's a complaint against an officer, it will go from the sergeant to the lieutenant to the captain to the deputy to my desk. We review it for how severe it is and assign it out to either A, the bureau commander, which is a captain level, which is part of the administrative staff, or professional standards, which is our internal affairs office. We will conduct a thorough investigation. We will go out, we will get any video, we will knock on doors to speak to anybody who may have witnessed it. We will review our policies, we'll interview the officers, we interview the complainant, and we will make a finding of fact at the end of it. When that finding of fact is done, the person who made the complaint will always get a letter from me indicating what the outcome of that complaint was. If they want to contest that or speak to it, they're welcome to come in and meet with me at any time. There are different mechanisms when a complaint can either be unfounded, it can be sustained, it can be exonerated, and those are different outcomes that happen. If a complaint is determined to be legitimate, there are several possible outcomes. It could be something as simple as we need to talk to the officer and then let them know what they were doing was inappropriate and wrong. It could be a retraining issue. It's something they didn't know they were supposed to be doing. It could be a discipline issue where they get suspended, they get demoted, or it could be an issue where they get terminated. All of which can happen based on the severity of the findings. Typically, as a police department, we will use progressive discipline, meaning we will start at a retraining level and work our way up. However, if there is something so egregious that we don't want them working here, we will move to terminate. And we have terminated several employees for cause. And I think that is a huge asset for us, and it's a huge asset to the community. So I hope that answers your question there. Again, folks, and just so everybody knows, at the end of this meeting, we are going to post some different emails that you can contact several of us if you have questions. If you're not comfortable talking to me, you can talk to Linda, you can talk to Gloria. So we're going to present some resources so you can email us. If you have any further questions, I'm trying to go as quickly as I can to answer these, but I'm available to speak at any time. If you want to call me, if you want to email me, I'd sit down and have an appointment. I can have a small group session. So just keep in mind, if we don't get to your questions tonight, I'm more than happy to answer any of those questions. And just reach out to me and call. Okay, we have a question. Are there any local programs or events that can educate residents or youth on understanding their rights? Sure. There are a couple different considerable amount of programs that we have. Number one, we have a Citizens Academy that we run every year. And that's not so much about the education of their rights. It's about how the police department operates. We go through every bureau within the police department and kind of explain its function, and we introduce everybody to all the different materials that we do. If there's anybody with questions about rights, we have classes for kids. We have a youth academy. We have kids go through. We have a program that we call the Mirror Project. And I'm going to take a quick break and let Lieutenant Camacho speak to it. Lieutenant Camacho is one of the founders of the Mirror Project. And that's one example of how we kind of go through and educate some of the youth. And Carlos, if you can also piggyback on that conversation, talk about the conversation we had at the high school, which talked about motor vehicles and subject spots. And everybody mute their microphone if possible. Carlos, if you can talk about the Mirror Project and kind of the conversations at the high school and how that relates to discussing people's rights and stuff.
Sure. So hi, my name is Carlos Camacho. Hope you guys can see me. I'm trying to get a camera view here. There I am. Hello, everyone. So I'm a lieutenant here at the police department. And one of my side duties or other things that I do that I'm very passionate about is I'm the chair of the Nashua Ethnic and Racial Disparities Committee. And one of the things that we do is we look at ways to keep our juveniles out of the justice system. So that includes police contacts, court systems, deferment, anything like that. So we work at different ways. And one of the things that we came up in Nashua and throughout the state is the Mirror Project. And we've been teaching the Mirror Project for about 5 years to local 8th graders. And it's a 1-hour class to talk about mutual respect, communications between the youth and the police officers. And what's really neat about this class is it puts the kids in a role reversal scenario. So we let them be police officers for a scenario. And then we, the police officers that are teaching the class, become the kids, and we kind of talk about different situations. And then it goes into a PowerPoint presentation, and it lets the kids talk to police officers one-on-one and ask us questions about, our job, about them getting to know us and us getting to know them, and it talks about questions of why we tell kids to put their hands in get their hands out of their pockets, why we do certain things that the kids see, but maybe have never asked. It's been really great. This program is being taught in Manchester as well, and throughout the state. It's also being presented on a nationwide level to other states in the country, because New Hampshire on a national level is doing a real good job at trying to keep minority youth out of the justice system, which is something that other states are trying to do as well. With this project, with this program, we also went into the local high schools and with NCCRJ, and we had the community conversations with kids about different topics that are on teenagers' minds. They're just starting to drive. They wanted to learn their rights about driving. Can an officer tell me to get out of the car? Can an officer, ask for my ID if I'm in the passenger seat? Excuse me. So we put, we sat down on a table of, about 8 kids to 1 police officer, and we just had an open conversation, and kind of like we're doing today, just ask any questions. And it was really great for our officers, because they got to talk to these kids and let them know what they do and how we do our job. And also for all these high school students that are driving and are out in the streets in our community, about how they can interact with police officers and learn their rights. Do I have to give the officer my name and date of birth if I'm just walking down the street? Topics like that came up, and the kids were very appreciative. Obviously, like anything else in both the Mirror Project and in this project, the kids at first were reluctant to talk to us. They came in with their arms on their chest, not wanting to talk to police officers. But by the end of the conversation, they were, having conversations with us. And the best part about these programs is that they're only 1 hour long. But then afterwards, the kids stick around, because we tell them, hey, we're going to be here as long as you guys want us to be. And they stick around and talk to us one-on-one and build that rapport and build that relationship. And they'll tell us stories about, when they got stopped, when their parents got stopped. So it's been a really great program. And it's we've also been teaching it at the Boys and Girls Club, which is a very big advocate of us. And we work together as long as our PAL, the Police Athletic League, which also deals with a lot of youth issues. And we're out there every day and working with the youth of our community, because they're very important to us. And I believe if we build a good relationship with our youth, our future will be a lot brighter. So that's some of the things that we do here at the National Police Department. And again, like the chief, I'm available. My email and my contact information is on the website. So feel free to contact me if there's any questions about these programs.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlos. Folks, I have a complaint from Alderwoman Shoshana Kelly. A question from Alderwoman Shoshana Kelly. How do you determine the legitimacy of a claim of bias? That's a great question, Shoshana, and I'll give you I'll answer it in a couple of different ways. Any complaint of bias is investigated just like we would any other complaint. A complaint of racism or bias would be an internal affairs investigation, which means it is specifically handled by our Professional Standards Bureau, which is a much more in-depth investigation, speaking to everybody involved and getting any evidence and any facts that we can gather together. I'd also like to kind of piggyback into that kind of question. Bias, being aware up front of biases in people who may be prone to bias is very important to us. So during our hiring process, every person that gets hired by the National Police Department has to go through a psychological screening. that screening has to meet with a neutral non-police department affiliated psychologist. And part of that psychologist that we use, his job is to sit and meet with that person for several hours to check for biases or pre-indicators for biases. It's really not something that you can walk up to a candidate and say, hey, are you prejudiced against Black people? Because a lot of people with biases know how to answer that question and go, no, of course I'm not. So instead, when in meeting with the psychologist, they go through a whole series of questions to kind of look for indicators of biases or prejudices. And then we get a report back. If that person has those, we're not going to hire them. So it's important for us up front to be reviewing that and to try to find out ahead of time what those are. And then as they're working here, our job is to field any complaints to identify any of those problems. Now, those issues aren't just identified by complaints from the public. We also have supervisors at every level that are trained and are looking for any type of need for retraining or inappropriate behavior by the officers. And it's the responsibilities of their first line supervisors, which is the sergeant, and the lieutenants monitoring the sergeants and the officers and the captains to the deputies to myself. Anytime any of that behavior biases towards any group, and it's not just a Black or white thing, it's any group of people, it's important for the supervisors to identify it, to document it, and to make sure that officers, A, retrained, B, goes through those discipline processes like we talked about earlier. So I hope that answers your question. We try to be very diligent up front about hiring people that are not indicative of biases, and we spend our time through supervisory levels and through complaint investigations to identify any officers that are biased and that are not acting appropriately. So I hope that answers your question there. I'm going to keep going through. Okay. So from Rory, how many complaints of bias or excessive force does the National Police Department receive a year, and how many result in officer discipline? That's a great question. I guess we do have a every year we do a use of force analysis. We are mandated by our CALIA standards, which is the organization that accredits us and proves that we are following best practices. Every year we're mandated to review our use of force and present a report that gives all that information. The report, every time use of force is used, an officer has to complete an additional report answering several questions about why it was used, what level was used, was the person injured, was the person under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or something. It asks a whole series of questions to document that specific use of force. That use of force report goes to the sergeant, the lieutenant, the captain, then it goes to the captain of the Professional Standards Bureau, which handles all of our training and all of our internal affairs investigations. Then it goes to a deputy chief, and then it gets signed off on. So that is kind of the process that everybody has to go through to document it. To give you a little bit of an idea, I'll talk a little bit about how we break it down. And it is a long question. I'll be happy to explain it to anybody else in greater depth if they want to sit down and meet and talk to us. And I'll also I'll get the information out for obviously our 2019 use of force analysis, which was done. To give you a little bit of an idea, people need to understand, I asked some people a question earlier today, not in the meeting, what they thought use of force was. So I'm going to ask you to take a minute, just real quick in your head, to say, okay, if I think of use of force, what do I think of? Because we document use of force, and I'll kind of explain why, and kind of see if you understand the amount of things that we consider use of force. And while you're thinking about that, to put 2019 in perspective, we handled 85,333 calls for service in 2019. Out of those 85,000 calls, 4,213 total arrests were made. Out of those, force was used in 210 of those cases. Now, out of those 210 use of force incidents, every one of them was reviewed by every level of supervisors that I mentioned earlier to make sure they were in compliance with what our policies and rules were, and to make sure that there wasn't needed any additional training. The when I asked you earlier to consider what do you think is use of force, we define force, or we document force. If I ask you to put your hands behind your back and you don't do it, and I have to grab one of your arms to move it back, that is considered use of force. That is considered open hand use of force. If you take that use of force away, we used force 177 times in 2019. And then it progresses through the different levels of force. Open hand control and restraint, open hand control and restraint, and OC spray. And I'm giving you this kind of from the bottom to the top of the use of force continuum that we use. And then, so as you go through all of those, if you took away the open hand and the restraint techniques in the OC, you have 57 uses of force out of those 4,213 arrests. Part of our annual report and the analysis, we talk, I'll just give you, I'm going to read you down them real quick. Again, I'll be happy to talk any more to them. In 2019, we pointed a handgun at someone 17 times. We discharged a handgun once. We used a taser 6 times, a taser drive stun 5 times, hand control 199 times, a hand strike 17 times, a baton strike once, a less lethal impact, which would be like a beanbag round 6 times, pepper spray 66 times, feet once, canine 4 times, knee strike 9 times, restraint techniques 133 times, baton restraint once. There were 15 officers that received injuries last year as a result of use of force, and there were 17 suspects that received the use of force. So we definitely, and we break it down in several different levels. And again, I would be happy to provide that report to you and sit down and go through an in-depth analysis of what we do. But every year we have to report those use of force statistics out. We do provide an annual report, and those numbers are scrutinized by the CALEA, which is, again, our best practice organization. So for the next question, I'm going to ask, I'm going to send to Gloria Timmons. First, Gloria, would you mind speaking to a question from Suzanne Paquin? Could Ms. Timmons and the chief speak to the situation in local schools, especially high schools, and what improvements are needed there, if any, such as the criminalization of discipline problems, which goes on elsewhere?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer. I don't think we have the problems elsewhere in Nashua that we have elsewhere. I don't believe that. Although we do have problems, we do have a task force that's dealing with those problems. We do have SROs in the schools as we speak for de-escalation.
Okay, Gloria, thank you. I was trying to figure out the next question here, so I apologize. Gloria, in relationship to your question, or the police, my perspective from your question, we very much decriminalized most of the activities in the schools. We don't, there was a period of time in the early 90s where there were mandatory arrests for fighting and all that stuff. We've reduced those almost down to nothing. The amount of arrests coming out of our schools are very, very small, and are usually for greater criminal offenses. So we definitely are aware, and we've definitely shifted thinking over the last 6 or 7 years. Again, we do have these numbers. I don't have those right in front of me right now, but we'd be happy to report out to you how many arrests we make in each of the schools each year. But those numbers have gone significantly down because we recognize that we're not trying to get kids in the criminal justice system. When kids are involved in an issue at the school, the first priority is for the school to handle it as an internal matter, and they have the discipline. Their discipline, unless it's a serious crime, supersedes our authority in the schools. So we recognize it and work with them. We also work with, like I mentioned earlier, groups called the Youth Council and different nonprofit agencies, where if a child gets caught with cigarettes or vaping products or shoplifting, we have an alternative before we put them into the criminal justice system. We have a program that they can go to, which is non-police related, that gets them to counseling sessions. It gets them the different acceptance of responsibilities and all these different things that if they complete, they don't go into the criminal justice system at all. So those are a couple things in the school. We do have school resource officers. They do make arrests in the event that they're needed, but we do try to get them there to make sure that these services are being provided for everybody.
Michael, Is there a possibility that you can put those statistics on your webpage? I know you sent them to me, so I do have them.
Yep, yeah, yes, I'm not opposed to sharing any of our information. We do have a full-time crime analyst here who loves statistics, so we have them and we can get them. If there's a particular interest for anybody, I'd be happy to share them. I will share bigger ones on the website. It's just can get information overload because we break down information so many different ways, so many different times. So, but if anybody has a request for information, please send it to my way. We're going to have a my email address is going to be up after for anybody to contact who wants to be on there. Okay. The question is from Sonia. Sonia Prince, are you worried that there may be a good old boys club within the department or bad eggs? And would you be aware of the existence? Not all brotherhood stuff makes it to the top or to the boss. That's a good question. As far as having a good old boys network, we have very high standards here to get hired. It doesn't matter who you know or who you're related to. You have to go through a process where you have to pass a very comprehensive written exam, which is job specific and certified non-biased. You have to pass that written exam, and then you have to pass a physical fitness test. After that, you have to go through a series of interviews with 3 supervisors, then another supervisor, then the deputy chief. If you pass all of those levels, you then get a conditional offer of employment, which allows us to really dig deep into your background. We require you to have a polygraph test, a meeting with a psychologist, a physical. We do a complete background where we talk to former employees, former classmates, former roommates, ex-girlfriends, boyfriends. We really try to dig deep into your background to make sure that you have been honest with us and your background is as you stated it was. And we work really hard to make sure that you're the right person for here. So you can't get by any of those steps just through the good old boy network. It's a process that goes through. I do not meet the candidates that we're hiring until right before we hire it. They've gone through a process where I'm disengaged. The deputy has been disengaged to a level. So different levels are disengaged until they get to a certain point, and then they meet with us to go through to see if they can continue on. As far as the comment about any bad eggs within the department, it's also a great question, but we've kind of answered it through our internal affairs and complaints and the level of supervision. I explained pretty extensively how the complaints are handled and what happens when they do come in. The supervisors, we have the first line supervisor is a sergeant, then a lieutenant who monitors the sergeants, then a captain, then a deputy, then myself. At every level, you go through an executive level of training. You go through the first line supervisor training at an established institution, and then you'll go through the same thing at a mid-level management and then an executive management level. So each of the supervisors have to go to classes and week-long schools to make sure that they are using best practices. They're using the latest management techniques. We encourage our police officers to go back to school to get a higher level of education. So all those supervisors are trained in looking for problem employees or bad eggs, as you'd like to say. If they're doing something wrong, it's addressed immediately on the spot, and there's documentation on that employee and that discipline. So all the other sergeants and lieutenants and captains and deputies are aware of what that issue is. If it continues to be a problem, the discipline gets greater. We'll move it to training and counseling forms, possible suspensions, possible termination. So there's a progressive discipline for that. So we've had plenty of scenarios that I've in my 26 years here where officers have violated those rules and regulations consistently, and they're no longer working here, and it's not through retirement. So there is a process for them to go through. It is in place. It is a vetted process, and we adhere to it. One thing I'd like to say real quick about being CALEA certified. CALEA is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. It is the organization which sets 480 standards that we as an agency are required to adhere to. We have to show every year that we are following those policies by backing it up with reports and documentations that we do. We say we do what we say we do. Then they come every 4 years and they come and walk through our building and spend a few days walking through and making sure all of our buildings are meeting policy. All of our the patrol officers on the street are doing what they're supposed to do. Then they'll go out and meet with the public. They'll go meet some of the community members, some of the groups that we work with, and they will make sure that the public views us and does what we say we're doing. So all those processes are in place, and our supervisors are under those kind of guidelines that we have a mechanism and a responsibility to weed out the good eggs. The sooner we can get that problem taken care of, the less of a headache it is for us and the less of a headache it is for the public. And I think we owe it to the public to do that. The last thing I'll say about our accreditation is we've been accredited since the early 90s. There's only one police officer left here that was here before we were certified. So every one of us, myself included, have come through an agency, myself for the last 26 years, that's been accredited. It is ingrained in our culture, is ingrained in what we do every single day, and there's no other option. So that to me indicates that we're following best practices on a level that's beyond just what we think is the right thing to do. I hope, Sonia, I hope that answers your question. I'm going to keep going down. Okay. How big is your department, and are there openings right now, or are all the positions filled? Excuse me, I'm talking way too much. I'm going to defer to Kevin Pasillo to take that question, and I'll fill in any gaps.
Okay. So we're authorized for 179 officers. We currently are down 6, and we're actually finishing up background on those 6. We just had a test this past Saturday. We're working on getting a working list for any potential retirements and stuff like that, to have a list. So when someone does leave, we won't be in the same position we were a few months ago where we're trying to scramble to get people on. So it's going to be a smoother transition. But to answer your question, we don't have an opening right now, but this PD, with retirements or anything like that, it moves quick. So there might be an opening in a couple months, a week, and people have announced their retirement. So that answers your question. I hope it does.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I am going to take a question from Laura right now, wondering where and how the union factors into investigations. Also included in that question are what are some special trainings and support that's a different part. I'll get that. I'm sorry. I'm getting yelled at. So wondering where the union factors into investigations. That's a great question. The National Police Department has 5 different unions that I work with. We have a patrolman's, we have a patrol supervisor, which is anybody in union that's a supervisor. We have a call takers and dispatchers union. We have a civilian employee union, which is a Teamsters, and then we have a civilian supervisors union. So I have to work with 5 different unions and 5 different contracts. I will say the relationship with all of those unions are fantastic. We have an open door policy. If they have issues or concerns, they come in and we can have a conversation about it. There are times when we disagree, and unfortunately, I think it's important to take a discipline matter a certain direction. And they have a process that they can follow, and they do follow. And if we'll go through the motions, and I'll justify the actions that I took. I think they've been very reasonable. They understand and I think appreciate the fact that we have a high caliber agency, and it's important to maintain that. So we don't get grievances like some of the agencies. I think that you'll hear me preach about the standards that we have to hire people. Typically, we will hire 2% of all the applicants that come through every testing process. So out of every 100, we'll find 2 officers that meet the standards. And because those standards are so high, we don't have a lot of the problem employees, and it negates some of those union issues that you may typically see elsewhere. So it's really important to hire good people, and it's really important to train them and keep training them so they know the way to properly conduct themselves as officers. So we're very fortunate to have a good working relationship with our unions. Next question is going to come from Jean. After all the recent ongoing events involving police versus Black Americans, do you think the Nashua Black community's perception towards police has turned bad? Do you have a metric you use to measure your relations with a given community? If relations are bad, what steps do you take to improve it? Thanks. I work with immigrants from Africa and Asia, resettled in Nashua. Gene, that's a great question. It's a long question. I'm going to try to tackle it as in bits and parts here. Do you think that everything that's going on nationally affects how the Black community views the National Police Department? I think absolutely. I think no matter what happens, police officers get lumped together. They get put into, something that, like, we get blamed for what happens in Minneapolis. I think that's just a police issue, and I think that tends to happen. I will say, though, I think in Nashua, and Linda and Gloria, Jordan, you can all correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think, and I'd like you to tackle some of this question too, because I think it's important for people to hear from the Black community the perceptions on what this has nationally towards Nashua. Part of me can only control the four walls of Nashua that we live in. I think that the relationships and the work we've put over the past 5 years, I think has minimized any negative impact. I think people know that I'll be the first to say we're not perfect, but we're working hard to get better, and we're open-minded and receptive to working on the relationships and being willing to listen to each other. I think that has resonated with people in Nashua. I think that they know I'm accessible and willing to talk and to listen. And I think that has maybe minimized any negativity towards the National Police Department specifically. As far as how do I have a metric that we measure the relations with any given community? I think I can answer that in a couple of ways. Number one of the ways I measure it is through our CALEA accreditation process. We just went through our process. In March was the final review of it. In December, the folks came and interviewed the community. They made sure that one of the pillars of that report for me and former Chief Lavoie was the relationships in the communities, and the assessors went out and spoke to members of the community in actual community conversation events, as well as an open forum for people to come speak. Everybody that came to talk at the National Police Department spoke very highly of the relationships that we have. And I think that is an indication to me that we're getting better and we're doing something well. I think that my conversations with the NCCRJ group has come a long way to gauge or to view how people view the National Police Department and how responsive we are to the Black community specifically. I have Linda is my ambassador, where she will call me and be the first one to make sure that if there's an issue, I know about it. So I count on her to say, hey, Mike, you need to pay attention to this, or you need to respond to this because you're making somebody feel this way. So I think I have people now that are able to tell me when we're making mistakes, but also to tell me when we're going well. I'm going to kind of pass it over to Linda, who has her hand raised. I really appreciate it. Linda, your perception and your views?
Yeah, I think that we've built a pretty good relationship with the Nashua Police Department as African Americans here. I do know that there's still issues and we're still working on them. But what I can tell you we have never had
Linda, you're breaking up.
Okay, I'm not sure why. Let me see. What I wanted to say is that I believe that people that do reach out, they are at least greeted, okay? And at times the outcome is what they expect. But one of the things that we've consistently said, particularly to African Americans that I associate with and those that I don't, because we do spread the word pretty well amongst us. And you can always call the police station.
Can you turn your video off and try that? It may be bandwidth real quick, just while you're talking.
So the essence of what I'm saying is that there's a relationship and there's a relationship building. And I see that happening more. What happens across the United States definitely does affect us, period. End the story. To watch some of the things that are happening. For me, I couldn't speak for a week to anyone. I literally had to shut down to, get myself back together where I needed to be. okay? Because I do a lot in terms of working to make sure the relationships stay cohesive in Nashua. And so I'm just surprised that there's not a few more people in this call that I thought would be here today, to be honest with you. But, you know, people work and some are just joining in and what have you. But it's been an interesting 5 years, almost 5 years of working at Nashua PD, because I've lived here for 41 years, 42 years. And it has not always been this way. And one of the things someone mentioned about the undoing racism, Nashua PD did step up. They did have 3 officers go to undoing racism, which was great because that's totally different from diversity, inclusion, and all those other isms. Undoing racism speaks only to racism. And it goes back and brings you from the 1600s up to the current, how we got where we are today and why Blacks are treated the way they are treated in the story. But we had 3 officers go through that training that were so impressed and came out and actually said they could see and understand exactly what what's been saying over and over again. And Chief has mentioned that there will be others going to the training. It's expensive. It's like $1,000 a person. And it's a 3-day, very difficult training put on by the People's Institute out of Chicago. And there might be others here on this that I know that might have attended the same type of training. But that would be my recommendation if you really, really want to know what undoing racism is all about. That is one of the groups that you should be reaching out to because the people that attend are of all colors and they come back much aware. I remember, and just to make it short, several years ago, one of my sons attended OBU. We sent some young people and he attended. One of the things he came back and said to me, Mom, had this happened when I was in high school, life would have been different for me. Okay, because it really is in-depth training about undoing racism and how to make it work. So that's my spill.
Linda, thank you very much. And folks, one of the things, the National Community Conversation on Race and Justice. Gloria, I see your hand up. I'll finish this comment and I'll let you speak before I get to the next question. One of the things about the Nashva's Community Conversation on Race and Justice, we tried about 1.5 years, 2 years ago to get a bigger group up for undoing racism. For whatever reason, something fell apart. We weren't able to, but it was expensive. For those of you who are wondering what you may be able to do to help, that would be a fantastic way to participate, is to help us fundraise to get to be able to get not just police officers, but I think it would be worthwhile to get some teachers and police officers and other Nashua City employees through this training. I think it's a win for everybody. So that is something that I think if you're interested in helping out, that's a way to do it. So I'm going to turn it over to Gloria now.
Well, thank you. Linda kind of touched on some of the feelings that we was experiencing over the death of George Floyd and other people. So during that whole crisis, if we're still in the crisis, is because every day we hear something new, it's not against the Nashua Police Department. I have to go back and think to myself that for the past 5 years that we was working with Chief Lavoie and Michael Kerrigan, that those things didn't happen here. And so it's like maybe I'm being a little naive to think that it can't happen here. So I didn't want to let my guard down. So what I had to do on top of all my other million duties is on Tuesday, actually go to Bible study just to get something out of my mind that I wouldn't have to think about the things that happen and turn off the TV. But to answer most people's questions is our relationship with the Nashua Police Department is different than other relationships in other parts of the state, especially with the state police. So we have worked diligently in Nashua to have a more cohesive bonding between us and the police department. I can call Michael at 2:00 in the morning and what are you doing up? That's the type of relationship we have, and it's good. That's the relationship I wish was around the rest of the country. I feel safe in Nashua. And guess what? I haven't left Nashua because I don't feel safe anywhere else. So having said that, Michael, thank you.
Well, Gloria, thank you very much. Nice of you to say, but it's a partnership and a willing for, to be able to have that conversation on both sides. I would like to point out again that Chief Obecki from Hollis, New Hampshire PD, and Captain Dave Caio, who's the #2 over in Hudson right now, are both on this because their agencies are, like ours, trying to work at improving relationships and really getting to know the community. So the willingness is there from not just Nashua, but some of these other good agencies as well. And I think that their presence here and being willing to sit down and start where we did, I think is a great sign and a great opportunity.
And they have reached out to us as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Okay, next question comes from Sandra Pratt. What are some special trainings to support our special needs individuals you provide to your staff? How do the police provide assistance to individuals with developmental disabilities? Is there special individuals to show if they have any special need? Okay, so we have if you could all mute your phones real quick, just check to make sure your phones are muted. Okay, thank you. So our relationship with our special needs community, I think, is pretty strong. It's something that we're always working to improve on. I mentioned earlier, one of the programs that we started last August was an autistic registration program. So people who either have autistic family members or have an autistic person that they're a guardian over can call the police department and register that person with their name, a picture, where they live, and what some of their triggers are. So part of that registration allows us, if we're responding to a call to that location, to know a little bit more ahead of time about what we're going to deal with when we get there regarding the developmental disabilities. We know that autistic children sometimes will, the younger they are, they'll wander off and they like water. Knowing that ahead of time allows us to deploy several officers immediately to any areas of water so we can hopefully prevent a tragedy that way. I mentioned the light as an example earlier. Police officers tend to have flashlights that could land airplanes in Logan. And if we know going into it that somebody has sensitivities to lights that would trigger a negative reaction, we go in without those lights going, just to handle it a little bit better. We also have really good relationships with some of the partnerships in Nashua that work specifically with developmental disabilities. Gateways is a program that we meet with often. We've had somebody on their board in the past. We don't currently, but would be open to doing that again. If there is an availability, if they have a concern or question, they know that they can call us. They have somebody here that they can call. Being a part of a board is important to me as an agency. I'm on several. My command staff are all on several local nonprofits. That ability allows us to hear the feedback coming back from whatever group it is, whether it be Bridges, the CAC, or any of those examples we talked about earlier. So that is part of the partnership, but that's one of the ways we also work with developmental disabilities. I will also say that an enormous amount of the National Police officers from the top on down have excellent relationships with Special Olympics of New Hampshire and the athletes of Special Olympics in Nashua. I think that the programs that they run, the athletic programs that they run and police officers participate in is an amazing way to connect with the Special Olympic athletes and kind of get to know each other on a personal level. So that relationship is also a way for us to connect with people with developmental disabilities. And I think that's a very strong one in this community. So those are different ways that we connect. And as far as the identification, part of that autistic registration program is you can register with us with what like I said, the address, the picture, what any information we need to know about it. So when we go to respond to that information, we can handle it a little better. So I hope Sandra, that answers your question. Be happy to elaborate on any of these questions anytime if you just want to reach out.
If I may, you did answer the question, and you guys do such a great job with us, with gateways and individuals that we work with, especially with the autism program. I just it's good for the community to know there's something, you know, amazing are being done too. So thank you. Thank you for the hard work.
Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate you saying that. You know, we talked earlier about, there was a comment made about police not being qualified to replace social workers. Again, I just want to stress that we won't ever do it. We get enough to know how we can help that person get to the services they know. The amount of resources in Nashua through nonprofits is amazing. Many people don't know how many different specialties there are. The ability of the police here to interact with all of them and know what they all do is an important way to bridge that gap for lack of social services, which the funding hasn't always been there. So thank you, Sandra. I appreciate you saying that. Next question is from Bernadette. In most Western European countries, the mental health professional social workers are actually not working with nonprofit organizations, but are actually members of the police forces. This relieves the law enforcement officers of some of the mental health tasks that have been, or over time, been transferred to police forces here in the USA. What do the National Police Officers think of? What do the National Police Officers think of such a model for operating police operations? I think that it's important for us to continue the relationship with nonprofits. I think that there are programs in the state. There was a program, I forget the one, with the mental health workers would partner with us, the mobile crisis, where the social workers would work with the police department and respond to calls. Great program. It struggled with finances and it wasn't able to provide the mental health workers at the level that was needed in Nashua. So funding for some of those groups are always very difficult. Social workers being part of the police department, we welcome any partnership. I will say that the nonprofits that we work with have the specialists and they work there, whether it be Greater National Mental Health, whether it be Lamprey Health, whether it be any of those organizations that have specialties to work with them, and they have the social workers there. So the relationship that we have, if any of those organizations wanted to come and provide a social worker to handle a specific situation or a general problem that's been happening, we would welcome it. That could be a homelessness issue, that could be a specific, veteran crisis, any number of issues. We would gladly partner with those folks, and if that involved putting them in the cars with us, being mindful of safety, we would be able to go out there with them and kind of see how they operate and what their needs are and what they expect from us and what level of service we can give. So that's kind of what we do now. I think it's still important for all of my officers to be able to recognize what those needs are and what those, I don't want to say symptoms, but what those realities look like for all the different ills that we have out there, so we can recognize them and be better able to handle them. Okay, I'm getting a request here real quick from Senator Melanie Levesque. Senator Melanie Levesque. She would like to say a couple words, so I'm going to allow her to speak. Feel free, Senator. You have the floor.
Hi, Chief. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. This is my first time that I've been to this meeting, and I'm so impressed at what you do. I always hold Nashua up as role model for the relationship between, can you hear me? Okay, all right. For the relationship between law enforcement and the community. And it's so important. I just want to give you an example of the power of the relationship. Last week, we actually passed several bills in Concord on banning the chokeholds, on funding psychological testing for officers, and on reporting officer misconduct. And I always say we could not have done this without the help of working together with law enforcement. As a matter of fact, that day when we were actually hearing the bills, I was texting with both Mike and Chief Hibecki from Hollis, just trying to get it right. And I think it's really important to say that we know that there's police brutality out there, but that doesn't mean that we're saying that everyone is like that. We know that there are a lot of good police officers, and we work with them regularly on a regular basis, and that things like transparency are very important. things like having a relationship is critical. So again, I want to hold you and Chief Hibeki up as being two role models that we should be modeling ourselves after. So that's what I have to say. And also thank you to Gloria and Linda and Sonia and everyone else for building this awesome relationship. We've got to do it everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate the comments and the kind words. I would like to say, part of my struggles as a police chief of the National Police Department, I see how we operate and I know our policies and I think what our reputation is in the city. So I struggle with what happens outside the four walls of Nashua, and even to a greater extent, the four walls of New Hampshire. Senator LeVake spoke of recent legislation that got passed. A lot of the things that they mentioned in that legislation, we already do. We've banned chokeholds and have done so for years. We mandate psychological testing for all of our officers. So I think the focus on some of these changes really needs to be effective policies and mandating policies for these agencies to come in. And they can get expensive. Not everybody can be CALIA certified within a year or two. It's a difficult process. You have to make physical changes to your police department. You have to mandate certain rules are followed and teach people and train people in what they are. So that takes some time. But I think the goal should be to strive for that accreditation. And that can be something as simple as, let's start with 5 good solid policies. Every department in New Hampshire should have a use of force policy. Every department should have a bias-based policing policy. Every department should mandate certain requirements of the officers that they hire. So I think that, the legislation, well, Senator, I had some private conversations about some parts of it. I think that fundamentally it's a good policy to have. And I think every law enforcement agency in the state should strive for those things. So thank you, Senator LeVake, for that.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You talked about if someone has a bad experience, a negative experience with a police officer, that they should go to the sergeant, go to the police station. What if they don't feel comfortable going to the police station? Or what if they may have gone before and nobody did anything about it? Is there any way that, anyone from the public can report an incident?
Yeah, so anybody can report a complaint to the police department. So if you're not happy with the service you get from a sergeant, I pride myself and my deputies pride themselves on answering our phones. So if we get a message from you, we will call you back within a day or two. As soon as we get the message, we'll at least reach out and say, hey, I want to talk about it. Your complaint's important, so come sit down and see me. If you hear from somebody that somebody's uncomfortable with treated a certain way, encourage them to reach out to me and we will talk about that complaint. People need to be able to feel comfortable calling us at the station to vent their complaints. They may not always be happy. There's always two sides to the story. And as you may imagine, sometimes people will say they were treated this way and they won't give you all the facts. So it's our job to vet that out as well. But we will give it an honest investigation and we will sit down and talk. And if somebody gets told that their complaint won't be entertained, I expect a phone call from them and I'll make sure that happens. And that's also part of our process to make sure that our supervisors are doing the jobs that they're supposed to do. We welcome the complaints to come because it's an opportunity for us to learn what we're not doing right and how we can fix it. If people don't tell us what's going on that's wrong, we have no way of knowing and it's hard to fix. So there's always a mechanism for people to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next question is from Stacy. And I'm going to pass this on to Gloria and maybe any other. I believe I saw a couple of school board members out as well. Are there any statistics whether the bullying that happens in schools has a racial component? At what age do you think cultural acceptance, if that's the correct term, programs should start to head this off?
Okay, thank you for that question. It's a wonderful question. And I was looking at the question and I did send this question over to Dr. Mosley, who haven't answered, because I don't know about the statistics, but I can tell you that there is bullying in the school based on race. I know that for a fact. I hear from other children. We got a lot of work to do in our schools, a lot of work to do with our board, a lot of work to do with the teachers as well. And they don't know when somebody is being bullied because of their race, because they can't identify it. we can't even identify it. So we don't have really statistics. That's a hard thing to have on bullying because of race, because we simply don't have that statistic. Secondly, one of the questions was that what age do you feel that we should be teaching cultural acceptance? And I think that began from preschool. Kids are taught racism and being racist. They taught that from birth and need to be corrected from preschool. That's my opinion. But I don't have statistics on it.
Okay.
Any board members would like to weigh in? Sharon, Heather, Sonia. I think Sonia had a hand up.
I can weigh in if you want. I don't have the statistics either. But sorry, I'm Heather on the board. I agree with you. I think that cultural bias starts early, and it starts at home. And I think that as we are working on our social emotional learning programs that we've started this last year, that's a good time to start talking about race and racial bias and teaching kids how to really tap into their own capacity for empathy and for treating others the way that they would like to be treated. And I think that another thing that I would like to see our schools do over the last, sorry about the dogs, over the next few years is look into how we can incorporate more divergent history in our teaching. So for example, making sure that we include authors of color in our literature programs, making sure that we're talking about that our social studies and our history curriculum is accurate and uses accurate terms for things. So I think there's work to be done, but I think that we've started it this past year. Did I get far afield? I think that answers the question.
No, that's good. Mr. Garino, do you have any comment on that? He's also on the school board.
Yeah, we did have some reports on discipline, but as Gloria said, we don't really have any statistics on bullying because of race. There was a question that I saw earlier in the chat, and it said that how do police officers deal with racism when you have white police officers, and that's intrinsic in their upbringing. And I think that question should be asked of not just police officers, but also teachers and firefighters, people that work at City Hall or wherever you work, because the way I look at it is that everybody has those prejudices, that baggage that you bring with you. But when you do your job, you're a professional and you leave those, you are aware of who you are and where you come from and the biases that you might have, and you leave that at the door and you go in. And it applies to me when I'm on the Board of Education. I just leave that at the door and do the best job I can and know how, and try to be aware. It's about self-awareness and just trying to do your job as a professional. So that's what we expect in our school department, in our district, and I think it applies to to a lot of different jobs. So, but as far as we still have to do more, like you say, we got to get some statistics based on bullying, based on race, and we do have more work to do. I agree with that.
And one other, Miss Gilio, Sharon.
Hi.
Sharon is also a school board member as well.
Thank you. I'm a fairly new school board member, but I echo what has already been said. I've been doing a lot of reading because I am on the Board of Ed, but I'm also retired. So I have a lot of time as issues come up. I have a lot of time to do reading, and children are not born racists ever. And I agree that the sooner, if we can get to it, yes, it begins in the home, But the earlier they get into a public school situation, like a preschool, where they can unlearn it. I think that that's really relevant. As a retired school librarian, I also know that librarians do a lot. Heather mentioned the curriculum, but also in the school libraries, we try very hard to make sure that we have materials that cover all cultures, all races, and that's just part of what librarians' responsibilities are. And so I think that it's something we need to keep working on. The other thing I can say is that from books for little preschool kids all the way up to books for senior citizens like myself, the recent events have created a real surge in people reading materials that are really important to read on racism, to give them more of an understanding. So I think we're all moving in the right direction. Probably we could move faster, but we have a ways to go, but at least we're taking steps toward it. So thank you, Gloria.
Back to you, Michael.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That was a great question and a good break. Before I get to the next question, I would like to invite Tom Lopez, Alderman Tom Lopez, to speak. He had his hands up. So I'd like to, Tom, if you want to jump in and either ask a question or say what you'd like, please feel free.
It's just in reference to the last conversation that was being had. And I came in late, by the way. Sorry, everybody, but I didn't get my links right. But my experience growing up with racism as a Hispanic person was basically kids don't always know how to aim the target, but they react to national and public events in a misplaced and imitating kind of manner. So I got a lot of bullying, I guess you could call it, when I was in middle school due to the Elian Gonzalez events that were happening. And the way it manifested were a lot of kids concluded that I was like an illegal immigrant from Haiti, which is not a Spanish-speaking country and doesn't really have any bearing on a lot of what was going on. So it's just an example of how kids in the school system may not necessarily be reacting to factual information, but they may be in a childlike way trying to imitate things or talk about things in a savvy manner that they see adults speaking about. So I think it's very important to have discussions of current events in schools. I know that can be a politically divisive topic and a very difficult one to approach because one side or the other could claim there's indoctrination, but figuring out a way to give kids a forum to explore ideas and in a academic setting, I think even in an early age is important so that they don't continue the biases and prejudices that they might experiment with as a kid. And then with regards to how they exercise that, I think we just need more paraprofessionals. We need more schoolyard teachers. There needs to be a better student to teacher ratio, because then you have more ability to interact when kids are not behaving according to the school ethics codes and all that kind of stuff. And you have enough adults in the room that maybe they can turn those situations into teachable moments instead of having to manage such a large group of people that they're not. They just intervene, try to stop the behavior, and behaviorally those kids walk away with just authoritarian experiences rather than actual insight or development. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Tom. To echo on what you're just saying, I think part of the result of this conversation and the relationship building that we've had for the past several years is the fact that you get to know somebody of a different color, a different race, a different whatever, and get to know them on a personal level. I think it makes you much more likely to be that person that will be comfortable and confident stepping up and calling somebody out on any of those comments and those racist comments. So I think that's also a huge plus for all of us, and not just the police in any relationship. It's once you get to know the people and are able to really connect with them on a level and respect them, what their culture is and for who they are. I think when you come across somebody of your own skin color who's making comments, it's much easier for you to do that. And that's how we become role models for everybody. So I think that's important. Thank you, Tom, for that. Before I get to the next question, I'm going to Lisa Vasquez, who works with our health department in Nashua. She's got her hand raised, so I'm going to have her speak. And just so everybody knows, the health department over the past several months has done an amazing job connecting with people through this COVID crisis. I'm surprised Lisa's awake right now because they've been working so hard. So, Lisa.
Hi, I just wanted to do a shameless plug. We did a recent video of how to talk to your kids about race with Dr. Nicole Christian Brathwaite, and it's on Facebook, it's on YouTube, it's on Nashua ETV, and it's a great way to talk to parents. It talks to parents about how to have the conversation. It talks a little bit about what kids might be experiencing in school, how to talk to them about current events. And I just thought it would be great for parents that are having these questions to look at the video. So if you have a chance, it's on, again, Facebook at the division page, on YouTube, and on Nashua ETV. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to take a real quick, Tanya asked a question a while back that is important. Do we have any recommendations for police departments in neighboring small towns and or for the state overall for policing? On a statewide level, I spoke to it earlier, I think it's important that each and every agency strive for some type of policies and procedures that are best practices. It's difficult to attain them all and to do everything right away, but I think if you focused on the most important first and work for that and strive for that, I think you'll be much better off and a much better agency. I also think that the outreach to community members is huge, not just as a police chief, but for the officers. For the conversations that we have with large groups, we'll have 25 or 30 police officers sitting at, one at every table, two at every table, willing to talk to 7 or 8 citizens and just kind of have an exchange back and forth. And I think that's important for the whole agency to be involved and participate, not just one person. As far as the small towns surrounding Nashua, each of the small towns have relatively newer chiefs, Joe Hobecki and Hollis, Billy Avery and Hudson, Denise Roy and Merrimack. We talk quite a bit, and as I mentioned, both have representatives here at this meeting here. I think the community is very important to them, and the outreach that they want to do for people and they do for people is just as important to them as it is to us. I'm fortunate enough to have a pretty large population to be able to do it, but there's a willingness on some of those other agencies to engage the community and work out. So I think any advice I'd give is advice that they would give me as well there. We're all trying to reach out to the community and connect at that level. So I think people in the surrounding towns are fortunate. Again, we all know we're not perfect, but as new chiefs, we're working towards getting better, and their willingness to do that and attend here and just reach out is important. I'm going to, the next question I'm going to send to Officer Pasillo, who again is our training officer. The person writes, Sonia writes, I've met 3 women. How many women are on the police force? Kevin, if you could answer a little bit about the diversity breakdown of our officers. I know you touched upon it earlier, but if you could just clarify it again for everybody.
So we currently have 15 women officers. We just lost one last week. She resigned during her MTO period.
I didn't hear that number.
15.
Yep, 15.
15 women officers. We had 16 and one unfortunately resigned last week during her MTO period.
Can't hear you. Michael, on your.
Yep. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the next question. We have a bunch of them, and some of them just overlap each other. And I did get a message from Joanne. Joanne, after I answer this question, I am going to let you have the floor. For those of you who don't know, Joanne St. John is one of the founding members and active participants in Nashua's community conversation in race and justice. Chief Kerrigan, this question is from Paul. Chief Kerrigan, in the disciplinary board / department that you mentioned earlier that reviews complaints about officers, are any of these members non-police Nashua citizens? Sorry if you covered this, I got disconnected. No, that's okay, Paul. It's a great question. We do not have a civilian review board in Nashua. We have no plans to do that. We have policies, we follow them. There is a process that once I make a determination of inappropriate behavior or discipline required, then it goes to the Board of Police Commissioners. There are 3 Nashua civilians that sit on the Board of Police Commissioners. Any termination process, they're the ones that have to make the decision of whether or not to terminate a police officer based on my recommendations of the findings of the investigation. I struggle. I know there's a large push for civilian review boards, and I'm sure there will be some disagreement here with me on it, but part of my concerns for a civilian review board is there are people that would judge that don't necessarily know the rule of law. And if you don't know the laws, or you make a decision based on emotion or based on a limited perspective of, say, a short clip of a video, you're not acting in a fair or appropriate way. So I struggle with the fact that civilians who may not understand what policing is all about and what the training is all about is judging police officers. I said earlier, this job is very, very difficult. Police officers are put in situations where they're forced to make a split-second decision, and they don't have the luxury of watching videos for hours and hours and analyzing every step of the video and talking about what could have been, what should have been. And it's very dangerous if you can sit back later and say, I'm judging you on what you did. So there are definitely concerns with it. I welcome civilian input. Some of the relationships we've built, I would have, we would connect with civilians to discuss problem officers, but I struggle with them making the decisions to discipline any of our police officers. Joanne, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, please.
Joanne, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go.
Yes.
Mike, I think you misunderstood me. I wanted to be the final good night because I had a little surprise for you. So my surprise was, as you know, I'm a fundraiser. So I wanted to offer you, after hearing Linda's story about the relationship, the fundraising, and the story about the $1,000 fee, I want to do a fundraiser. I would like to have a meeting with you and Linda and Gloria if we could arrange something. And I want to make that happen. So could we arrange a meeting with the 3 of us and we can have a grand fundraiser? Would that be great?
It's not with the fundraiser we're having already, is it, Joanne? I mean, are you combining them?
That doing this is going to be a huge fundraiser for the $1,000 to raise for the police, some of the police departments, some of the teachers. I think it's very important, and so that's my offer to you, Mike Kerrigan.
Anyway. Thank you very much, Joanna. I was looking at the next question. I would always welcome a meeting with you,
Okay.
even if it's sit down and have a cup of coffee, but definitely fundraising. And
Well, coffee will be in on that as well.
I think that it's fantastic. And if we can come as NCCRJ to really connect and get that going, I think it would be a worthwhile program. Again,
I think it would be great.
we can get police, we can get some fire, some teachers. If we can get some of the different groups, and I think that would be.
Yeah. That sounded like a great program. So sorry to interrupt the thing that was going to be the end of the meeting surprise. And by the way, this meeting has been fabulous. Thank you. Everyone who spoke, wonderful. So back to the meeting. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're at about 7:01, folks. I'm willing to stay on as long as people have questions to ask. Or again, and afterwards, yep, Chelsea, I'm going to get to you. I'm not closing this out yet, but I just want you to know what you have to say matters. So we're going to have some more of these. We can do them at different times. You're welcome to email at any time. So this is not a one-time, one-shot deal. And I think Jordan has mentioned that publicly a couple different times, that this is not something that we as a group have suddenly stood up and said, hey, we need to support each other. We've been doing that support for a number of years. So, and we will continue to do it. So my next question is going to be to my dear friend, Chelsea Schultz. Chelsea has a question about, how about American Sign Language class for police officers? I hear that some of my hard of hearing friends having a hard time talking to the police, And I don't understand. Four? Oh, okay. Sometimes I don't understand the police officers. Chelsea, it's a great question. Like any other language, non-English speaking language, we struggle to find officers that are certified in American Sign Language. We have one right now that is certified, and what's that? And it is something that would be a tremendous opportunity for us to teach them. Anybody that's willing, we'll let them go through a class, and we would let them become knowledgeable in American Sign Language. So it's definitely something.
I can teach you guys, because I know ASL that I was 5 years old. I tried to teach you guys the basics, only the basics. You guys need to communicate with us.
Yeah, Chelsea, that's it. So to answer to everybody, that's a valid concern. We do have a population that, American Sign Language is the most effective way to communicate it. And if I can have police officers that know how to do it, that means the interaction with you is a much more favorable outcome. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to accomplish as police officers that are citizens and working with the community, is we want to be able to connect with you and have a better outcome.
Thank you, Mike.
I know exactly where to find you, Chelsea. We can certainly recruit you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chelsea. And I'm going
You're welcome. Thank you, Mike and Officer.
You're welcome. The next question, hold on one second. I'll scroll down to get to the next question. Okay, sorry, folks. I'm trying to not answer some of the questions that we've already answered a little bit. This question is going to be from Germano. How are the police commissioners appointed? What is their term, and do they recycle? That's an excellent question. The police commission in Nashua, we have 3 police commissioners. They are nominated and appointed by the governor of the state of New Hampshire, and they are approved by the executive council out of Concord. The term is for 1 year. It's a 1-year term. It's a 3-year term. Every year, one of the 3 cycles off or gets reappointed by the governor. As a police chief, the 3 police commissioners are my boss, so I have no say in who is nominated or who is elected or what that process is. They do they do have members. The commissioners are residents of Nashua. I think that the board of police commissioners being selected by the governor is tremendously important for the Nashua Police Department. It keeps local politics out of running your police department, and there's no disrespect to any of the local politicians who are on this meeting. It avoids any scenarios where if the police department has to investigate something at City Hall, it takes away that control from the mayor's office, and the mayor, not just the mayor's office, but the board of aldermen. They can then turn around and say, hey, this is a completely neutral investigation. We fully support it, and it's a process that I think keeps local politics out of it. So Sonia mentioned earlier about the Good Old Boy Network. Part of the way that we're able to keep that from happening is to be able to have police commissioners that are not appointed locally, but are appointed by the state government. And what that means is the police commissioners, they're the ones that are responsible for approving the National Police budget that we present to the city. They do all of our hirings, promotions, firings, and discipline process. So it's an important body, and it's important that body stays disconnected from national politics.
Thank you for your answer. And I just wondered, is this is it a law? Is it a local rule, law, or just a practice that's been on for a long time? So is it different than Manchester, and every town's a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure there are any police commission boards left that are appointed by the governor. I think it's important. I'm not sure why some of the other organizations haven't, but I think for the reasons that I talked about, it's important. As far as how long we've had commissioners, certainly before my time, I believe well before the 70s and into the 60s. I'd have to double check, Germano, but I'd be happy to get that.
Yeah. No, it's okay. I was just wondering if it was a local law or a state law or an RSA. How did they go about that format? It was working, but
yeah, there is an RSA, and It's a great question, and I can get the specifics for you. I'll be happy to do that for you. Thank you. Next question. I see that Mayor Jim Donchis, who has been with us for the evening, has his hand up. So I would like to recognize the mayor. Thank you for attending. Just so everybody knows, the mayor has been a huge proponent of Nashua's community conversation of race and justice. I think his reputation as a community leader in race relations has been there since well before this tenure, back to his last tenure. He's brought my brother's keeper into the state of New Hampshire, into Nashua, being the ambassador in the first city in the state to do that. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Chief. And I think I wanted to thank, on behalf of the entire community, everyone who's been involved in NCCRJ for all these years, the police department, Chief Lavoie, now Chief Kerrigan, and everybody else, Linda, Gloria, Sonia, Joanne, now Jordan, everybody who's involved. Because when you talk with city leaders around the country, the one thing that, is just the worst thing that can happen is if there is some kind of incident regarding, a racial incident, potential racism, charges against the police department, one of these horrible murders, anything that happens in that area, and then there's a terrible community reaction. And that is a terrible thing that can happen that happens in various communities sometimes when they have good people at the head of city government, but it still can happen. And I think that everything that you've done over these years has greatly improved the relationship between the PD and the community. And as you've already said, nothing is perfect, and there's still work that can be done and will be done, I'm sure. But in my opinion, you've greatly reduced the chances of one of these horrible incidents, and therefore have made Nashua a much stronger place to live, and a better community. So I wanted to just thank you for all the work you've put in over the years, and those who came up with the idea and have worked on it for so long. And that's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. And we all, as a group at CRJ, appreciates the support you've given us. I see that Lisa Vasquez and Tom Lopez both have their hands up. Lisa, I'll start with you and then move to Tom if you still wish to speak.
Hi, I think that was from before, but I do want to say thank you so much for being so responsive to all the community needs. And from the health department, we want to thank you for being at every testing site with us, making sure everyone gets through, knows where to go, and everything runs smoothly. So thank you for being there for the health department, but also just in general for the community. Thank you for being responsive.
Thank you, Lisa. Alderman Lopez?
So I heard the phrase local politician used, so I felt like I should weigh in. As a local politician on the Board of Aldermen, your mileage really varies with regards to the background, intentions, and commitment when you have local politicians. Where in theory, we're divorced from the national politics and the parties and all that kind of thing, but that's not in practice always the case. So I think Nashua has a pretty unique situation here, like it has so many unique situations. And before you look at changing it, you might want to really think through all of the consequences of that, because as it is right now, you have an opportunity for a representative who is a legislator and a representative who focuses on the fire department and a representative who is on the police commission. And I think while it would certainly be important to make sure that people are represented by those boards, and in the smaller boards, the commission boards, maybe is a little more difficult with less places to make sure that people from a more diverse walk of life are fully represented. I do think that it's not necessarily the best idea to have all of those interests in the same boat, because then you're basically going to get less chances and less opportunities to affect change in specific areas. So I know there's a desire on the executive level to have a little bit more integration between the funds that are being used by the police department and the enforcement of the policies that those funds are used for. in the same way that I've heard people express the same desire that, well, I wish the alderman could do more than just give money to the Board of Education and then they decide whether or not or how they're going to use it. But there's a strength there because each individual need is more directly and attentively addressed by those people who are specifically elected. So I would say before we necessarily look at trying to change any of Nashua's frankly bizarre governmental processes, maybe it would be an idea to focus on making sure that the representation on those boards is diverse and representative of all peoples.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. I think to echo some of that, I think that we're very, very fortunate in Nashua. Yeah, maybe we have some unique systems, but they work very well. Like I mentioned a couple times in this meeting, the relationship that all of us have, the NCCRJ committee, when we first started meeting, we have, state reps, we have alder people on it, we have nonprofits, you name the group, people are willing to help out, listen, and participate. Every community conversation we have people from those nonprofits boards, from the city government, from every agency. So the cooperation between everybody in Nashua, again, it's not perfect and we don't always get along, but it's amazing to watch. I think people in Nashua are very, very fortunate and we want to continue to listen. And this issue specifically, with what's been going on lately in Minneapolis and such, it's important for us to take a minute to listen and let's understand the anger and the frustration of a big part of our community. And I think Nashua is receptive to that and willing to do that. So it's not always easy, but we're willing to do it. I see that, Sonia, you've tried to have your hand up, but it didn't come up. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
I just wanted to address some of the comments that were talked about schools. So I have three. You're right, Tom. I was the police for conflict because I feel like a lot of teachers are just standing around talking to other teachers, and that's always a problem. So when I was teaching in Louisiana, I used to break up fights, and sometimes there were racial words exchanged. And often I'd break up the kids and I'd say, "What's wrong? You guys are friends. You play every day. What's going on?" And they'd say, "I heard it at home," from an adult. So they're definitely learning it at home. My second thing is, I was at Nashua North one day picking up my daughter, and there was a problem on the third floor. A teacher called in and said, "There's a kid that just stormed out of my room. They're headed down whatever hall, headed towards the bathroom." The police officer was in the camera area where the reception is, security, never left that place, which I kind of liked. And they just radioed somebody upstairs. Antoine goes around and develops great relationships with the kids at school. And he went down and met the student that was upset and managed to calm him down. So the nice thing I liked was, I'm not a big fan of police roaming the halls per se. It could be intimidating for some kids, as much as you'd like to be perceived differently. I know that's a two-side thing, but I was impressed that he didn't leave, but he was there. Like, I figured if there was a mass shooting or something like that, kind of nice to have somebody there, but I know there's a lot of differing opinions on that and people don't want anybody in the school. So that's my 2 cents on that. And then third thing, I have raised a child of color from age 7 on. And obviously I can't compare my experience to any African-American family because I don't know what that's like to happen day in and day out, but we've had our share. But 7th grade was difficult, and there were a lot of racial things that were said, but half the time it was taken care of and half the time it wasn't. So there's still work to be done in our schools. Sorry about that.
No, Sonia, don't be sorry. Go ahead, Gloria. I'll let you speak first.
Sonia, I feel for you, but you're absolutely right. Those kids experience things in school that is not accounted for. We don't have data on that kind of stuff. That's why I couldn't answer the statistics on racial bullying, because it goes on all the time. And what we have to do is fix it. And I quite understand your pain, because I think we all, meaning Linda, she can weigh in on herself, but she don't have to weigh in. I already know that she had the same experience that we all had. And Ray Ely as well. I know there's a lot of work to be done in the schools, and that's what we're going to tackle tomorrow. It's not going to go away, but we have plans. And one of those plans is to tackle that sort of, I call passive racism. I might have coined that term. I never heard it anywhere, but I feel it's passive. They listen and they hear things and they do absolutely nothing about it. And that's why your son had experienced that and will continue to experience things like that if we don't fix it now.
Awesome, Gloria. Thank you very much. Sonia, thank you very much for sharing that. I know it's difficult. I know we've had a few conversations. So I think the ability of all of us to listen and get better at that and have those conversations with everybody will hopefully make all of those outcomes good for you. I just want to touch upon real quick before, and I know it's getting close to wrap up time. I just want to touch upon real quick your comments about the school resource officers roaming the halls. There's definitely been a shift in thinking and approaches to SROs over the years, certainly over the years of my career. We try to make sure that the officers that are assigned to those roles are a little bit more open and friendly. They're not walking the halls just telling kids and disciplining kids. We certainly defer to the schools to run their schools and manage their discipline system like they're supposed to. We're there if they need them. My goal and our goal at the police department is to have those officers accessible, to be able to make the kids feel comfortable, to make the kids feel like they have somebody to go to if they have those questions. It's important to me that our officers are all approachable and professional when you deal with them. You're never, ever going to be 100% happy with the experience you have with police officers. We tend to deal with people having a bad day or a bad situation. Former Chief Lavoie was fond of saying nobody calls the police and says, hey, I'm having a real good day. I'd like a cop to come over. So we tend to deal with people that are in crisis. And because of that, it's not something that is always, a positive experience, but we can certainly do it in a compassionate way, in a professional way. And that's what I think what we're all striving for. As we kind of get to the end of tonight, I think, I know it's whenever you get into emotional issues, you can get pretty tired easily. So I want to just start by saying thank you very much to everybody who's still on and everybody who participated. This is something that we're going to do more often. This is something that as NCCRJ, we used to meet once a month. We broke to quarterly as things kind of wound down a little bit. We'll probably increase those meetings. So if you have interest in helping out or working together or just dealing with some of the relationship issues between the police and communities, please jump onto the Nashua NCCRJ Facebook page. You can email me and we can connect you at the next time we have meetings. Would love to see a large group of people attend with ideas on how to improve relationships or ideas of something that we can do as a community to continue moving forward. So I appreciate the time. I'm going to allow Gloria to close out, but before I do, I'm going to have posted right now on the notes section of the chat section is, so if you can capture it, take a picture of it. We're going to pass out some contact information. My email is going to be on there. I believe Gloria's is on there. The NAACP, the Outreach for Black Unity. At least several contacts that if you're struggling with relationship issues with the police department, please reach out to any one of us that you feel comfortable. If you're having some concerns, you can call me anytime. Despite what Gloria said, I would prefer the call not to come. Really, but I get up about 3. So I appreciate
you didn't sleep.
You're always up and I'm up. So I appreciate the time. We're going to post that information right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Gloria. And then the last thing I'll say before I do is thank you very much to the NCCRJ members. I appreciate the support and the help that you've allowed us to have this effect in the community. So couldn't do it without any one of you, just like you couldn't do it without us. So I really appreciate the relationship. So with that, thank you. We will post when we have the next meeting. And Gloria, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Chief Kerrigan. I always call him Michael, but he knows he's the chief. First, I'd like to thank the co-chairs, and that is Chief Kerrigan and Linda Gathright. and members of the NCCRJ, including Suzanne Harvey. She's a co-founder, and we miss you tremendously. She had been instrumental of making the NCC is what it is today. She's been right there with us. So I miss you and I want you back. Also, I'd like to thank Black Lives Matter and the National Police Department for hosting this event. Mostly, thank you for the wonderful questions that you have for our panel. And if you haven't been heard or wasn't able to get your questions in, you still have the opportunities to be heard. We do want our community to walk away feeling that this meeting was not a waste of time or you felt unsatisfied. Moreover, if you feel uncomfortable speaking in this type of platform and still need your questions answered, you can email that question to NashuaPD@NashuaPD.com, and that list is on the chat box that Michael put up. Your questions will be kept confidential between you and the police department. Questions that pertain to the public will be posted on NCCRJ and Nashua PD website. Those questions that's in the chat box right now that was not answered will be put on the Facebook page, and we have a Facebook Messenger as well. Finally, please join the ongoing conversation with NCCRJ by becoming an active member. We meet every third Thursday, and we need to start that back up, Michael, as you said, from 2 to 4 at the police department. You get to know the police department like we do. It used to be amazed. Now I can go anywhere and not get lost. We will post each meeting on our Facebook page. We need you to make this the best community in the state. Again, thank you and good night.
Thank you much, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.